Hey there. I just wanted to take a sec to let you know that in between producing the show, chasing my son Seth around, and generally living life, I took time to write a book about my own adoption journey. It's called Who Am I Really? Of course. If you'd like to pre-order a copy, go to whoamireallypodcast.com and click Shop, where you'll be redirected to the publisher's bookstore. I hope to make it to your reading list. Okay, here's this week's show.
My birth mother tells her, look, I'm not allowed to have contact with him. The kids have his contact information. If they want to contact him, they're welcome to. I've given them, you know what I mean? Everyone's aware. And man, that felt like a knife through the gut. And I don't know why. Like in that moment, I felt orphaned.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and on today's show is Steve. He called me from London, Ontario, Canada. Steve shares his story of being adopted after his mother lost a child, but Steve and his mother never connected. In fact, she stifled his social development and seemed to be holding him back because he didn't look like their family and didn't fit in. As a teen, Steve was out on his own in the streets when he learned that he had fathered a child. That's when he became a single father. In reunion, he found a connection to his birth mother, but empty promises ended with rejection, and that surprised him. This is Steve's journey. Steve doesn't recall being told he was adopted. He just always knew it, but he doesn't know how he knew that fact. By his description, his parents were typical adoptive parents in the 1970s who wanted the dreams of family many parents aspired to back then. But his adoption came about out of adversity.
They wanted their 2.3 kids in a white picket fence. They had a girl, then they had a baby who was stillborn, and they were told that they would never be able to conceive again. And so at that point, they pursued other options and ended up adopting me. A year and a half after that, my mom got pregnant. My little brother was born, sort of the miracle baby. And I think that sequence of events affected me and my life in a number of ways that I didn't really understand until much later. So here I am, and I'm in this family. This is a Norwegian family. Everyone in my family is over 6 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. They get a sunburn walking under a light bulb. And I am not like that at all. You know, I am on the shorter side. I'm 5'7" now, fully grown. I got black curly hair. Well, it's gray now. I just didn't look anything like them. And it's very obvious, you know, in the family pictures and whatnot. So I think I always felt different. Also, I have a really unique surname. You've never heard it before. And so when people comment on the surname, they say, oh, I still get this often. That's a nice name. And then I have to explain that I'm Norwegian. And I am obviously not Norwegian.
Interesting. So you have to explain something that people can see in your surname as unique and different, but they don't know how unique and different it is because, in fact, you are not even of that surname.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just, I mean, the truth is, my name is an anglicized version of a Norwegian name that a grandfather, I guess, changed it when he came over here. Regardless of that, I don't bother explaining it anymore now. People say, oh, that's a nice name. I'm like, yeah, I didn't pick it, but thank you.
Steve has had time to explore his lack of connection with his adopted mother, and his research has helped him understand why the creation of a family through adoption doesn't always follow the script for parents and children to connect.
I'm still sort of trying to sort this out. So I had a decent childhood. I don't really have anything to complain about. My needs were looked after, but I wouldn't say I wasn't happy. And I always, honestly, I just felt like my mom in particular, she just didn't like me. But I think, and so, I've come to some understandings much, much later. After going sort of through my reunion thing and starting to read some books and do some research, I'm coming to understand that, a lady who's grieving the loss of a baby was handed another baby who was 11 months old and told, this will take all your grief away. And then there's a baby that's been ripped away from a parent, handed to another lady, and, they're convinced that lady's going to take all the baby's grief away. And there's two people who, needed something from each other and didn't get it. And I think that kind of explains, that's where the relationship started, and it never really got better.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I mean, this is one of the things that I think often is lost in the discussion of adoption and adoption trauma is these very stark facts about how the family is created. It's that, and in your instance, your mother was suffering loss and her own grief that she had to get over. And then here you show up as basically, a potential Band-Aid for that grief and a place to sort of dump her emotions. But at the same time, you have been taken from another place, placed into her arms, and there's the separation that you feel. I had a guest recently tell me that one of the big challenges in his family was his adopted mother hated his aunt, and he never could figure out why. And it wasn't until he met his biological mother that he realized his bio mom had the same exact voice as his aunt. This is the voice he would have heard in the room, So there is that separation. It's really hard.
I've now come to, recognize that it's not her fault. This is what people believed at the time. This is what social work was telling people was, a baby doesn't know the difference between its natural mother and its adopted mother.
Can you give me an example of, you said that you basically felt like your mom didn't like you, or, tell me a little bit about that tension in your family. Where did you start to see that or feel it?
To begin with, I guess I was a cranky, crabby baby. So I have, I've got some notes from a doctor, that I found in my dad's files where, they say I've got some crankiness and crabbiness, although at other times in, especially in company, it says I'm very active and lively. And I think this crankiness and crabbiness, it probably just came as a result of, like I said, two people adjusting to a new, was considered to be a problem. And so I was sent to doctors and to psychologists and stuff from a very young age to try to figure out why I wasn't happy like the other two babies, I guess. And they never figured that out. But, it's interesting, again, in retrospect, looking and saying, like, they saw that. But the doctor in the letter acknowledges that the crankiness might be attributed to adoption. But it's interesting how, as a child, I had what were perceived to be these behavior problems, even as a baby. And all they were trying to do is fix me and not recognize that, does that make, what I'm saying?
That's right. Yeah. It was, there's a problem with this child, not a more systemic look at all of the things that this child is enduring, that the family is inflicting or withholding or whatever. Right. It's just, the problem manifests itself in how agitated the child is, but it's not a broader examination of the environment in which the child is in or has come from or what have you. I totally get you. That note about Steve's adoption being a possible cause for his crankiness was just one line at the end of the doctor's letter written in the 1960s. Steve's mother stayed at home with the children while their father worked as an executive at a local community college. Steve said that as his primary caregiver, their mother had no patience for him. He said when he left home at 15, he had never been to a sleepover at a friend's house, had never kissed a girl, nor been to a school dance. He wasn't allowed to do anything.
They had me convinced I was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just looked back recently and said, man, I wasn't that bad. I mean, I did shit like any other kid did, but, I wasn't as bad as I was convinced. But it's like my mom did not want me to leave the house. My brother and sister would go spend a week with grandparents in Toronto. I never once did that. Never went on a school trip that they did. And I'm not sure the reasoning behind it, but I just felt like I was in the way, I guess. I was an inconvenience.
Did you feel like you were being hidden? I mean, from an outsider's perspective, the way that you're describing your intended withdrawal, your intentional withholding from social and interactive things with family, with friends, it sounds like they were hiding you almost.
Maybe. I haven't thought about it like that, so that's something I'll have to reflect on a little bit. But yeah, it's quite possible. I guess it did occur to me that I think they were a bit ashamed of me. They didn't like answering the questions either.
Yeah, right.
They're introducing the family.
Steve was led to believe that he couldn't be trusted to behave appropriately, and that's why he wasn't allowed to participate in anything, ever. It was all unfounded. Steve described himself as a witty, ham-it-up kind of kid versus his much more reserved siblings. He says he doesn't have a lot of childhood memories, but he does recall two things that happened very clearly. Brace yourself for these triggers.
And, some parents talk about adoptees, I guess, as though they're special. And so one clear memory I have is my father telling me the thing that makes adoptees special is that you have to keep your natural kids, but you can return an adoptee. I don't believe that was said with the malice, that maybe we would consider that it has behind it now, but I think it was pretty unhealthy, an unhealthy thing to say.
Really? He said
that would be my dad's attempt at humor, just so I don't believe it was malicious. The other thing my mom used to say to me all the time was, if you don't like the rules, you can find another place to live. And she used to say that from as young as I remember. And so till I left.
Wow.
And so one day, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but at lunchtime, I was in grade 11, and I came home from lunch because I was never allowed to stay at school at lunch. I had to be home. I was very, very controlled. So,
and your siblings could stay at school?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Now we lived very close to the school, and but yeah, it was interesting. I wasn't allowed to leave until we heard the school bell ring, and then I had to run to school, and I had to be home 5 minutes after class ended. I just wasn't allowed to stop and
socialize.
Socialize with anyone. So I really didn't have good friends, or it was kind of lonely, I guess, in retrospect. Although at the time, I don't know. I think I thought everybody lived like that.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, so you think your normal's normal.
Yeah, I didn't get to hang out at other friends' houses, so I didn't really know what their families were like, I guess. So anyway, one day at lunch, I guess I just had enough, and Mom said, if you don't like the rules here, I don't even remember what it was about, but if you don't like the rules here, you can find somewhere else to live. I remember packing 2 garbage bags full of clothes and going to school, throwing them into my locker, and going to class for the afternoon. And then after school, I went to the phone. We used to have pay phones, and I went to a phone booth with a London Penny Saver, it was called, that had classified ads in it, and ended up renting a room from some people and never went back.
Steve already had a job working at a bakery on weekends and over the summer, so he picked up some night shift work after school. Mind you, Steve was allowed to work on weekends, but not socialize. When I asked about his siblings working during the school year, he realized that his sister, the only one old enough to work when he lived at home, had not had a job during the school year, only in summers. As a matter of fact, he had also had a paper route for a while, which he had gotten himself fired from twice, and both times his mother called his employer to get his job back. She wanted him to work. The money from the route was saved in a joint savings account, so when Steve left home, he went to the bank and withdrew his earnings. He bought a mountain bike, which he rode across town after school to his job. Renting a room for only $45 per night, Steve was sure to arrive at school as early as he could to shower in the gym before classes. In school, he completed the 12th grade, but he couldn't complete the 5th and final year. He was still a naive kid without many real-life experiences. He got a second job, saved enough money to rent an apartment, which coincidentally a coworker was vacating, so he gave the guy his down payment. On moving day, Steve showed up to his new place only to find he had been conned. The people already living in the place knew nothing of his arrival. His older coworker had stolen his money. Steve was penniless and homeless. He lived in parks, slept on benches, and couch surfed where he could. Steve got in with a bad crowd, got into trouble with the law for a misdemeanor, and got arrested.
So when you're arrested, you have to have a place to live. You have three choices. Like, they gave me three choices. You can wait for your trial in jail, you can go back and live with your parents, or you can stay at the Salvation Army, men's mission here and follow their rules. And obviously I didn't want to go to jail, and going to my parents seemed even worse than that.
Right.
Because in my shoes, all I ever did was try to make these people proud. My whole life was just trying to, do something to get some sort of positive reaction.
Yeah.
And so obviously I can't call them up and say, hey.
Steve stayed at the Salvation Army men's mission for nearly a year and a half, waiting for his case to be completed in the 1980s. One morning, he was awakened at 7 a.m. and escorted to the front desk.
And there's a guy there that hands me a subpoena. He says, a baby's been born. The mother left him in the hospital. You were named as the father when she checked in. Children's Aid has apprehended the baby, but because you're named as a father, you have the right to dispute that apprehension.
Wow.
And I'm like, I got no job. I know who the girl is, but we hadn't been together and, whatever. I didn't know I'm making excuses now, but this is a girl that, I met her and I would go to dump her every month, and every month she'd say she was pregnant. And so I'd stay with her for another month, and then I'd go to dump her. And anyway, finally I left, and I guess that time she really was pregnant. But that changed my life, because I was homeless, jobless, and hopeless, really. I had no plan, no potential, no nothing. But my sort of partner, when you're living on the streets, you're always in pairs. Someone's always got to be watching your back. So when I went down to the front desk, he came with me, and he looked at me and he said, I bet you can't get custody. And I said, I bet you I can. And, there was no more noble reason than that, but we went and called a lawyer on Monday. I stole a suit from Le Chateau on Tuesday, and I was in family court on Wednesday.
Wow. Really? And how did it go?
Yeah. Well, obviously I wasn't in a position then. So Kevin's my son, he ended up with a 3-month Crown wardship, and I was given some obligations to attend visitation and whatnot and get my shit together.
When you live on the streets, Steve says, you always know someone who's in court for something, so you spend a lot of time at the courthouse. It was cold in Canada, so the courthouse was a great place to get warm anyway. There was one Salvation Army captain named Gary Johnson who had an office in the courthouse. He offered the youth of the area coffee, and he would give them straight talk about life.
And the real reason we were there, Damon, was he had this great big glass thing filled with change. And we spent like a year trying to figure out how we were going to get this thing out of the courthouse. And we never did.
In the courthouse planning a heist.
Yeah, man, there had to be hundreds of dollars in this thing.
Steve is in Gary's office in his white Miami Vice-style stolen suit, so Gary knows Steve is in court for his own hearing. Gary tells Steve to be sure to go back and see him after the court hearing. Steve's infant son is sent back into a foster home for another 3 months. Then, Steve heads back to Gary's office. Captain Johnson told Steve he had called in a favor, and Steve now had a job. He was to report to work on Monday morning. That act of kindness was a new beginning for Steve.
I don't know why. This guy just saw something in me, I guess. And he gave me a break. And then the people that he set me up with really helped me out. And so 9 months later, Kevin was placed in my home, and I was a single dad.
That's incredible. That is really unbelievable. And it speaks to something that my father-in-law often says, that, a lot of times we give a person one chance, and then that's it. They mess up and you're done with them. But this guy has offered you another opportunity to get your life turned around. And that often is the key, is offering someone a second chance to make something good happen. I can't believe that you were able to pull that off. That's really amazing.
It didn't even, when you're in the middle of something, it doesn't seem like anything. It doesn't seem like it's impossible.
Yeah.
People often, it still pisses me off when people talk about single mothers and how hard it is. When you're doing it, it's not hard.
Mm-hmm.
You just get up in the morning and do what you got to do.
Yeah, because you're in it, and it has to be done.
The only time it becomes hard is when you start trying to compare your life to somebody else who you happen to think is more fortunate than you, but you have no idea what they're going through day to day either.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember people all the time. So I ended up, getting him, going back to college, and so I was a student and working and a single father, all at the same time. And people would say, "Oh man, that must be hard." And it just never occurred to me that it was hard. It didn't feel hard. You wake up in the morning, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this, and you just go do it.
Yeah. Do you recall at all a moment of thinking about Kevin as a reflection of your own life, that had you not gotten him, that he too could have been adopted and felt a similar disconnected? Was there ever that calculus in your mind of, let me not let what has happened to me happen to this child?
Not consciously.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder now when I look back, because the decisions that I made were kind of irrational given the circumstances at the time.
Yeah.
So there may be some sort of unconscious thing, but not consciously. No, I did not go through that thought process consciously.
Mm-hmm. But in hindsight,
and
you probably feel it.
Yeah, I think it had something, because it was crazy. Really, I mean, being in the position that I was in, it was crazy. And I mean, I wasn't looking for a child. I didn't want to be a dad.
Yeah, right.
But I do remember going the first time to visit him at the foster home, and as soon as I saw him, he looked exactly like me. And I think he was the first person in my life that ever looked like me.
Wow.
And maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah, right.
And I can tell you that when the lawyer recommended, hey, man, here's what you need to do. You need to get a job. You need to get an apartment. You need to make sure you're not going to jail from these charges, which, that wasn't really a danger anyway. And you need to get some character references. So you need to talk to your parents, he said. And I talked to my parents, and they said, no way. Like, the first thing my dad said was, you're not going to keep him, are you? And, and I'm just like, so, we didn't speak for a while. And my mom didn't speak at all, but she would have been embarrassed. She was all about image.
Mm-hmm.
Still is to this day,
She didn't weigh in on the situation at all at that time.
I did not have I'm sure she weighed in, but not with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't even have that conversation with. If my dad's a very, very fair man, and if his opinion was you're not going to keep it, then, I wouldn't even have had the conversation with my mom. I avoided conversations with her anyway. And I'll say that while I was in school for the first, I'm going to say 1.5 to 2 years of Kevin's life, my father would sneak over after work and visit with Kevin. My mother did not see him till he was over 2 years old.
Steve's father used to visit on weekends, too. He would say he had to go into the office for a few hours, but he was really at Steve's place, visiting baby Kevin. I asked Steve how he felt about his father sneaking over, and he said he felt proud of himself for how much he had grown personally in a short period of time since learning of Kevin's birth. Of course, he never lived up to his mother's high hopes that he would become a lawyer, but still.
I remember, I think, feeling like he was on my side for that situation. He was coming over, he was sneaking around. He was always a very fair man, but he wasn't home a lot. And so his vision of me was always what my mom told him, not firsthand experience. And so he believed I was a bad kid because that's what he was told when he got home from work. So I think when he was coming over to visit was the first time him and I really, he just got to see maybe some of my better side. I think I felt like he was on my side for a while there.
In the 1990s, Steve had been a single father for several years. He and Kevin had moved around quite a bit, living in Calgary, Banff, and Vancouver, anywhere but London, Ontario, where his past was behind him. There came a point in his life when Steve just seemed to be a familiar person to a lot of people. They would ask him if he had a brother because he looked like or spoke like someone they already knew. Of course, when you're adopted, you have no idea how to answer their inquiry. It all made him think about his identity, medical history, and his nationality. But on one road trip from Vancouver to Ontario, Steve stopped for gas, not realizing he was on a native reservation.
So I pull in. I didn't even realize, I don't think, that I was on this Indian reservation. I pull into a gas station. The guy fills up, and he asks me for my status card, my Indian status card, which I don't have because I'm not Indian.
But he thinks you're native.
And he argued with me. Yeah, he was like arguing with me. Come on, you're native. And so then I started thinking, maybe I'm native.
So at some point, Steve kind of started poking around a little bit. But the only resources available were online databases and forums that were established to try to connect adoptees with their birth parents, like Can Adopt, SoundX, and Parent Finders. Steve entered his birth date and place of adoption into the online resources from time to time. He recalls reading the bitterness and rage of the adoptees for how poorly their lives had turned out, and from the birth parents who expressed their anger for children that were stolen from them. But Steve didn't feel that level of negativity personally, and he hoped that his birth family didn't hold that level of animosity either. No positive results were ever returned to Steve through those online resources. Steve thought about placing himself on the government-run provincial registry, which had an adoption office dedicated to facilitating reunions, but there were two reasons he didn't go through with it. One, Steve's the kind of guy who would drop his application for reunion in the mail, then check the mailbox daily looking for a response, torturing himself. There was an 18-month wait on reunion applications, so waiting would have been awful.
The second one was, I wanted to control the reunion. I wanted to find out who she was before she found out who I was. And I had this fantasy in my head that I'd be sitting outside the door of her, house for a few days, watching her, stalking her, making sure she's the kind of person that I want in our lives before I let her know who I am. Because I have a son whose mom left him in the hospital, and we've never seen her since. And I don't want a crackhead showing up. I don't want to find out that that's what my mom's like too. Or if I do find that out, I don't want her to know who I am.
For those two reasons, Steve just let the idea of reunion go. In 2001, Steve's adopted father died of cancer. While cleaning out his office files, Steve found his own adoption order. There wasn't much information of value on the document except for his birth name. In 2005, Canadian courts opened adoption records to all members of the adoption triad. There was a 2-year transition period for the records to be unsealed by 2007. That transition was too long to wait, so Steve, then in his 40s, found an ad for a private investigator named Anne, and he hired her. In less than a week, Anne returned to Steve with an entire list of documents, including census records, obituaries, tracking everything back to
a girl who was in London at that time and went through and right to, I'm like 99% sure that this is your birth mother. Here's her address. Here's her phone number. She's in Halifax. What do you want to do? And Halifax would be, 2,000 kilometers from here, but still in Canada.
Okay. So not close. So what did you decide to do?
No, not. So I wasn't sure what to do. I was nervous. I don't know why, except I think I've just been trained from a very young age that I'm an intruder in people's lives, and I don't want to be an intruder in anybody's life. So I was really scared. First, she said, Steve, I've done like hundreds of these, and I've never met a birth mother that wasn't happy to get the phone call. Would you like me to make the call for you? And I said, that would be great. And, and remember, I'm skeptical. And I've heard this, I've read this. You can even read like this book, The Girls Who Went Away, which is a fantastic book, but it kind of acts like all birth mothers want to meet their children. And they never stop thinking about them, and they have birthday parties on their adopted children's birthdays every year. And that's not true. And I know that's not true because I have a son who had a mother who left him in the hospital and never came back.
Yeah.
So I know this isn't true, but maybe she's the one in a million. So she makes a call. She screws up a bit. She makes a call on Thanksgiving weekend.
Oy.
So she does get a hold of my birth mother, but she's got all her family in the house when the call comes in, which, in retrospect, probably you want to do a little differently.
They learned that the woman was unsure how to proceed. Steve's birth mother was married with 4 other adult children. Her husband was aware that she had a baby, but Steve's siblings didn't know. The woman didn't know what to do, so she asked for some time to think. And the PI asked if it was okay for Steve to write an introductory letter, and his birth mother agreed. Steve sent the classic letter, apologizing for the shock, not wanting to intrude, and saying he's made a good life for himself. He noted that he is very different from his family.
Well, one of the things that came up in the phone call with her was this my birth mother wondered if it was even legal that we had been able to track her down, which was, I thought, it stuck in my mind at the time.
Yeah, it's a flag.
That was an odd thing to ask.
So he included in his letter some information about the legislation that would unseal adoption records the following year, noting that when it happens, she has the option to request confidentiality at that time if she'd like. He asked for his birth father's name and mailed it off. Remember how Steve is the kind of person who would check the mailbox every day?
Every freaking day for, I want to say 6 months.
Oh,
nothing.
Torture.
So I was kind of getting angry. So then I sent another letter, and this one was a little bit snottier. And I think, like many adoptees, though, I'm a pretty good manipulator. And so I just sent a letter saying, listen, obviously you don't want anything to do with me, and I can understand that. But would you please at least give me my birth father's name so I can find out something about myself? Something along those lines. And it was, I'm not going to say it was designed to make her feel guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And it got a response. So I got a phone call from her.
Wow.
Like almost right away. And it was really strange because the phone rang. I picked it up. She introduced herself. She was obviously nervous. And then we settled into a 2-hour conversation that was like the most natural conversation I've ever had. It was really strange. And I don't talk on the phone. Like if I'm on the phone with you for an hour today, Damon, that's probably longer than the last 20 phone calls I've made combined. Like I'm not a guy that chats on the phone. She told me everything about her family. She wanted to know about my family. She was, it was really strange. She told me a bit about being at the unwed mother's home and how my father didn't want to give me up and how it was really hard for her to give me up. And it was really like this went all over the place. It lasted 2 hours. And at the end of the 2 hours, I was actually afraid that she was going to show up at my door.
Oh, really?
Like she was so open. Yeah, it was amazing and almost kind of scary. And so what she said, one of the things she said during that was that her husband is a Supreme Court judge, and he basically forbade her. This is her story. I'm not sure I agree. I believe it now, but I did at the time.
Okay.
He forbade her from contacting me, and he was afraid that if the kids found out that it was going to blow up their family and they'd never speak to each other again, or their kids would never speak to the parents again because they feel they were lied to their whole lives and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And so that was her problem. But she was going to work on it, and she had a friend who had just reunited with her adopted child, and that friend was telling her, man, you got to go see this guy, and, you got to do this, and tell Walter to go screw himself. And, it was really interesting. She told me who my father was, but she said, please don't tell him where I am. I said, of course not. No problem. And she said, I have baby pictures of you. And I'm like, I would love to see those. I've never had a baby picture. And so she promised to send them to me. And that was about it. So we hung up. Everything was positive. I didn't ask a lot of questions about my background or anything. It was just chatting. And there was no doubt that we were going to have another conversation soon. Like, it was just so comfortable. She told me all about her kids' names, and her oldest son, which would have been her firstborn after me, his name is Steve. Now, my name is Steve, but that name was given to me by my adopted family.
Wow.
So we thought it was really odd that, that the son she gave up ended up with the same name as, the next name that she picked. And I think when you're an adoptee too, and in these reunions, you start, sometimes maybe we read too much into these little things that seem like
destiny kinds of things.
Yeah. Like, you go through and, this person likes to play music and I like to play music. Her son, Steve, is an accountant, and, I work at an accounting firm, and I do some martial arts and he does some martial arts. And, it's like we're exactly the same. Like, come on. But anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You got to admit, there are some crazy coincidences.
Yeah. So anyway, so we hang up the phone, and then I don't hear from her again.
Months and months go by. No letter, no baby pictures, nothing. In the meantime, Steve begins searching for his biological father, who has a pretty unique name and owned a business in a small town called Ridgetown. Steve calls the Genealogical Society to seek help in locating the man. A woman takes his information.
20 minutes later, I get a phone call from the newspaper in Ridgetown, which is this like little weekly, rag thing. This guy starts phoning me. He's like, you're looking for Walter. And he's like, Walt, I knew Walter really well. He says, Walter owned a clothing store here in town, like a formal wear store in town. And 3 generations of my family worked for him. And
wow.
when he died, he left me the building, and I turned it into the newspaper.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah. So I hear I'm talking to this guy. And he's like, Walter never had any kids. He did have a brother. I think his brother's name was Joe. His brother lives down near Caledon, which is like an hour the other way from here. He tells me all this stuff. The next day by courier, I received an original copy. Oh, my father had died. Sorry, I missed that part. So Walter had died. Yeah, I guess I did when I said he left the building. But anyway, He died in 1996. So I'd missed him by about 10 years.
Okay.
But everything I heard about him, both from my birth mother and from this guy and from reading the obituary and like that. So he made me think this is the guy that I was like.
Really? Like what? What resonated with you?
He was generous. He was never married. He liked to travel. He liked to give. He was Croatian. He was very active in the Croatian community. So, his family came from Yugoslavia before it all split up and everything. And so they're Croatian. And I think as soon as I said it was Croatian, it's like, that's what I look like. I never really thought about it before, but it made perfect sense. They said he spent his time like driving people from this little town in Ridgetown to London to the cancer clinic and back just on his own time as he got older, because that's the kind of stuff that I do. I don't know. And plus my birth mother told me that he really wanted to keep me. So I really wanted to be like him.
Your birth mother,
non-identifying him.
Your birth mother told you that Walter wanted to keep you.
He wanted to get married and keep me.
Wow. And
she did not. What she told me was she didn't feel like the relationship was sustainable, and therefore she shouldn't go that route. But the non-identifying information that I received in the meantime also said that he continued to visit both him and her mother. So that would be my maternal grandmother, were pressuring her to keep the baby, and she elected not to. Of course, the non-identifying information goes on to say it was a very difficult decision for her and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
This guy felt like my ally. He's been dead for 10 years, but, when I found out the stuff about him, I felt like, man, this is the guy. Plus, he was an entrepreneur, and I'm an entrepreneur. I don't know. It just felt like, this was probably my people. And I felt really bad that I hadn't pursued this, 10 or 12 or 15 years earlier.
Yeah, but the fear can be paralyzing. You can only do what you can do in the moment when you can do it. There's not much else you can.
Like finding out that he had no children and he wanted one, and that was me.
Yeah.
And here I was all along, and not an hour from him. Here I was all this time.
The man who owned the Ridgetown newspaper sent Steve an original copy of the newspaper reporting his birth father Walter's death. His birth father was on the front page. The obituary was on the back. The guy sent a few pictures of Steve's father as well. The man also went to the trouble of finding a phone number for Walter's brother Joe, Steve's uncle. The man was in his 70s, and Steve's phone call, of course, caught the man off guard.
And this guy's the nicest guy in the world. He invites me to come down for dinner. He's got a little horse farm. So I drive down there and I have dinner with him and his wife. But it was really strange because, I have no evidence that I'm anything to this guy.
Right.
He's never had children either. So I'm like the last person in the line in this family. Their parents are dead. They had 2 sons. Neither of those sons had kids. And it was really strange. And, he told me a little bit about Walter, but it was I just found it uncomfortable. And not because he wasn't a nice guy or suspicious or anything. It was just, I don't know. It was just weird. I guess I just, again, felt like I was intruding for no real reason. So I had a really nice evening with him and then with him and his wife. And then I went home and I never called him again. And I actually Googled him a few weeks ago. And he invited me to call him again. But I just never really knew what to say.
Steve learns from his Uncle Joe that Walter had a girlfriend who didn't get along with the family when he died. When he passed away, she took his body to the United States and buried him in an undisclosed location. She locked up his home, so the family was unable to recover many of his belongings or learn much about the last years of his life. In the meantime, Steve is still waiting for his birth mother to send him the pictures she promised. In 2008, he decided it was time to send another letter.
So I write her another snotty letter. And this one's like, obviously you're having second thoughts about the promises that you made to me. I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you that Walter's dead. I kind of write this, and it's probably a little bit manipulative again, but I want her to feel guilty, I guess, about promising shit to me and not. This is one of my pet peeves, is if you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you can't do it or you're nervous about doing it, just don't say you're going to do it, right? That's all.
Yeah.
And so that's a personal pet peeve of mine that extends far beyond
this situation,
this adoption circumstance. But it just pissed me off. Like, I didn't ask for baby pictures. You volunteered that you had them. You said you're going to send them, and here I am. So anyway, I write this kind of snotty letter, and it generates a response. I get another phone call, like almost right away. So now she calls me. She's at her cottage. Her husband's out for a run, or I don't know. He's out somewhere, so she's alone. And she makes it pretty clear that she's probably not supposed to be calling me. And we, again, settle into this most natural conversation. It's the second time. And I spent another 2 hours on the phone with her. And it was perfectly natural. And this time she's telling me all about her friend who just reunited with their adopted child and how wonderful that was and how supportive her friend was, and telling me about her kids and how she's really looking forward to telling her daughter about me because her daughter will really understand. And we go on for another 2 hours, and it's fantastic. At the end of it, she says to me, like, her big challenge again is her husband, and he's basically forbidden her from having contact with me. And maybe if I call the house from time to time, she'll get used to the idea that I'm going to be around. And I said to her, I'm not comfortable with that. I said, your family dynamics are your thing to deal with, not mine. And I don't, I'm just not comfortable. Like, if you can't handle your own sort of family dynamics, and I just can't see. So anyway, I just say no. Like, I can't do that. That would kill me.
Yeah, you can't be used as a crutch to fix something in the house. Because, in fact, it could make
Now-
things worse.
Well, yeah, and it certainly isn't going to help me.
Right.
So anyway, I just say, look, I don't think it's, not only am I not comfortable doing that, but I don't think it's fair for you to ask me to do that. And if you, truly want to continue along this path we're on, and develop some sort of relationship, whatever that is, then I'm happy to do that. But I'm going to leave it up to you to call me. And she never has. So that's kind of how it ended.
Steve hasn't spoken to his mother to this day. One of the challenges you may have picked up on is Steve's birth mother told him all about his brothers and sisters. He knows their names, ages, where they work, and he has, of course, found them all on social media. One of his brothers was a reality TV star in Canada, so since he was likely receiving so many friend requests from fans of the show, Steve sent him a friend request as well, kinda sneaking in the back door, as it were. His birth mother also said that she felt her daughter would be supportive of the whole situation, so naturally, Steve focused on her Facebook account, just kinda watching. Late one night, feeling kinda lonely and possibly after an extra glass of wine, Steve sent her a Facebook friend request that he immediately regretted. He deleted his Facebook profile immediately and stayed off social media for months. In the interim, he met a woman through his real estate career who was from Ridgetown. Her family knew Steve's father and gave him some additional pictures of his father.
I think it's about 4 months later, I feel safe and in control again. I go back on Facebook, and almost immediately I get a message from this girl, and it says, the message is, I'll never forget it. It says, "You sent me a friend request, then you disappeared. Do I know you?"
Wow. Uh-oh.
And I thought, that is strange. Like 4 months later, like who saves the requests for that? That's certainly not how I run my Facebook, but who saves a request for that long and monitors it? And I don't know. It was just really weird, and it kind of threw me for a loop.
That's interesting.
And I'm having conversations with this lady I work with about it. I'm telling her, like, this happened, and I remember it was like Christmas Eve in 2012. We're having a Christmas brunch together, lunch, our team, drinks after work or something, and I'm telling this story, and she's like, she knows who you are. You should just be honest and tell her, because she knows who you are. There's no way she would have done that if she didn't know who you are. And I'm like, I don't know. So I spent a few days. I tend to be a bit of a sort of spontaneous guy, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, but, not think things through. But I took some time and kind of crafted a return message to her. And really all I said was, no, you don't know me, but your mother thought you might like to. Why don't you have a chat with her and get back to me? And to this day, I don't know if that was the right response or not.
Wow. So
I think I forced her to, start the conversation. But then I never found out anything after that. So I didn't hear back from her. I didn't hear back from anybody.
Steve's sister never accepted the friend request that initiated their contact. Going back a little, when Steve was in contact with his birth mother, he had given her his email address and mobile phone number, but back then, people often had a work cell and email address that they gave out as personal contact information. So when he switched careers into real estate, where he met the woman from Ridgetown whose family knew his birth father, he lost that old contact information. If his birth mother had changed her mind about getting in touch with him, she could no longer do so.
I started in real estate, and I started doing these newsletters every month to my clients. And so I decided what I would do was I would just include her in my mailing list, my database. And so I just sent her a newsletter every month, even though she's, thousands of miles away.
Oh,
and so that way wouldn't be anything personal from me really necessarily, but it would have my new contact information and maybe keep her appraised. And also my mother did have a Facebook page, and at the advice of this sort of life coachy late coworker of mine, I did send her a message on her Facebook, and it just said, it wasn't a friend request. It was just a message saying, I just thought that if you were curious about sort of my life, this would be a non-intrusive way for you to see what's going on.
Ah.
Because you got grandkids and stuff.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly how it was worded. It was something like that. It was just an invitation to stalk my Facebook.
Right.
Without an actual friend request or anything. And anyway, so these, finally after a few months of these newsletters, I finally got one that was returned to sender. That the people didn't live there anymore, which I think was bullshit. I think they just didn't want to get them anymore.
Yeah.
But
the husband, perhaps. It sounds like things just sort of never materialized for her in terms of getting back in touch with you. And I'm sorry to hear that. Wow. This has been fascinating. It's been interesting to see, the story of the adoptee who feels out of place and then ultimately is in a position of parenting a child on his own. It's funny how our stories can form this circle of being the adoptee to having our own children in whatever form that takes. And you stepped up spectacularly to take care of Kevin. I just find that absolutely amazing. And I'm sorry that you didn't get a chance to meet Walter and share Kevin with him, but it sounds like there's still some work to be done. I feel like your mother could come around at some point, but I'm sorry that she hasn't also sort of held up her end of the bargain, because she set up some expectations that it's unfair that she didn't keep. And that's really hard. And even though you made a connection to your biological mom, at least you got to hear her voice. You got to catch her before something, bad happened. I'm just like you. I wish that she had held true to the things that she promised and offered up some of that information that really could have connected you and her back to a time when you were born. That's just unfortunate.
Yeah, the thing I struggle with mostly was that I wasn't really looking for a mother. Like, I was looking for information on heritage. I was just kind of looking for background information. I wasn't looking for a relationship. So I was really surprised by how deeply hurt I was by the rejection. But that really caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't have cared less if I actually found out who she was when I started on this thing. I didn't care who she was. I wasn't looking for a mother. Man, I can't even deal with the family I got. Why would I want another one?
I asked Steve about what he learned about his Croatian heritage. He lamented that he felt so comfortable in his 2-hour conversations with his birth mother that he was lulled into a sense of having lots of time to get to know her. So he didn't ask anything about their heritage. Ancestry has given him some clues about ties back to Great Britain, but that's all he's taken time to discover. In the years that followed, the rejection left Steve feeling kind of unsettled, so he went online looking for supportive resources. About 5 years ago, Steve found the Adoption Council of Ontario online, where he connected with a woman on their team who offered to try to reestablish contact with his birth mother.
So she phones my birth mother, and at that time, my birth mother tells her, look, I'm not allowed to have contact with him. The kids have his contact information. If they want to contact him, they're welcome to. I've given them, you know what I mean? Everyone's aware. And man, that felt like a knife through the gut. And I don't know why. Like, in that moment, I felt orphaned. And I don't know how to explain it. And that really caught me, but I was obsessed. I was angry. I was betrayed. I couldn't explain it.
Yeah.
But, this lady kind of walked me through it, and she recommended, I was actually looking for, because it was affecting my work. I couldn't think about stuff. I wasn't focusing on work.
Mm-hmm.
I was just messed up, and I was really surprised by it. And I tried to attend some counseling sessions, but there are very few counselors or social workers that understand adult adoptees.
Yeah, that's right.
To have any experience with them. It's just not out there. So then I started reading some books, and they helped a lot. I read Primal Wound. I don't really like Primal Wound because I find it to be very negative and anti-adoption.
Yeah.
The Girls That Went Away, though, I found very helpful.
Me too.
Journey of the Adopted Self, I found very helpful. Birth Bond, I found very helpful. But anyway, and all I have really been trying to do for the last few years is reconcile this feeling of hurt that I got from being betrayed by someone who really doesn't mean anything to me, or being rejected, I should say.
Yeah.
And you know, I've been working on that, and I think it's getting better. Though I do still have times where I'm like, I don't know. I got these siblings. Should I reach out? Should I not reach out? Should I sit here and be cool or not? You know, I don't really know what to do. How am I going to feel when I find out she's dead?
Yeah. Man, it's really tough to sort of navigate these other pieces of it, the aftermath, right? You go on the search, you find the person, and it's a funny thing. I hate to make this analogy, but it's a little bit like running for public office, right? You spend all this time and money and energy focused on this one goal, and then you win the election, and now you have to actually do the job, right? And it's a similar thing in these adoption searches, right? You spend all this time and money and energy attempting to reach this person, and then when you reach them, you now have to deal with whatever the relationship turns into, and you have to do the work of being, you know, a person in this new space, and it's really tough. Well, Steve, I got to go, man, but this has been really unbelievable, and I appreciate you sharing the depth of your story, because I learned a lot about, you know, just one other person's adoption journey and how challenging it can be. But I'm glad you got a connection to Walter. I think that was really important, and I hope you feel at least somewhat whole knowing that you and he are similar in some way.
Yeah,
Good.
I feel good.
Good, man.
And I really enjoy listening to all the different stories on your podcast, because it's funny to listen, and you know, somebody will say something, I'll be like, yeah, that's exactly it, and then half an hour later they'll say something else, and I'm like, no, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's not how I feel at all, you know?
I know. If there's anything that I've learned in doing these interviews, it's that you really just have to take a step back and respect someone else's perspective, where they're coming from, where they're trying to go, and realize that it's not your journey, and far be it for you to judge. You know, we all have to live our own lives, and we have our own influences, and it's up to each of us to choose our own path. And I just want to help people to tell their story. So I'm really glad you're enjoying the show, and I appreciate you being my guest today, Steve. All right, take care, man. All the best to you. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam, and you take care.
All right, you too, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, it's me. Steve's story hit on many of the things that I think about when I now contemplate adoption. He's this dark-haired, short kid in a family of tall blondes who was hidden from the community, and he was frequently reminded that his adoption was a technical bond, not a personal one. But what an incredible U-turn Steve made in his teenage years, moving from the streets into fatherhood, raising Kevin as a single father from day one. And it was great to hear that he felt like his birth father Walter was a guy whom he would have wanted to know. But there are some lessons to be learned in Steve's tale. For one thing, it can be tough to figure out how much to ask of your birth relatives and when. Some adoptees have expressed regret for their vigor in asking a barrage of questions, but Steve was left feeling like there was plenty of time to satisfy his inquiries, where in the end, he got no answers about his heritage. Additionally, don't underestimate how powerful your emotions about this search are going to be. You might not go into a reunion search wanting very much. Then, you might find out you're more deeply emotionally invested in the whole thing than you're even willing to admit to yourself, as Steve alluded to in the end. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you find something in Steve's journey that inspires you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I, really? I just want to take a moment to thank Boom 106.9 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for the use of their studio to record this podcast today. Thank you guys so much. If you would like to share your adoption journey and your attempt to connect with your biological family, please visit whoamireallypodcast.com/share. You can choose to share your whole story, maintain some privacy about parts of your journey, or share completely anonymously. You can find the show at facebook.com/WAIReally or follow me on Twitter @WAIReally. And please, if you like the show, you can support me at patreon.com/WAIReally. You can subscribe to Who Am I Really on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, it would mean so much to me if you would take a moment to share a rating or leave a comment. Those ratings can help others to find the podcast too.